Hello, hello, good morning, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2024. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Shellyan Edwards Barron, and I'm a creative writing specialist who focuses on multisensory learning. Now, if you are new to the live, thank you so much for joining me. And I should let you know this is episode 27, so that you've missed 26 episodes if you haven't already checked them out. You can go to in the SEA Peacefield approach in the video section. All the videos are there. It's on my website, wordcoach.com. Just look for Journey to SEA 2024 and you'll find all the videos are there. And on my YouTube channel, Word Coach Limited, go to the lives section and you'd see all the videos are there as well. And like I said, if you're new, then you'd really want to go back and check on some of those videos because right now we're at the point where we have pretty much covered all the basic foundation skills. We've looked at different strategies and ways to approach the creative writing. And we've also touched on quite a few really important concepts for comprehension as well. So go back to those videos, get the information, and then you'd be able to follow along and continue with the um I guess compilation of the skills, because today we are going back to our understanding of the different types of reports, and we're starting with incident reports today. Now, remember when, for those of you who've been following, in the beginning, I mentioned that, writing skills require repetition, they require practice. And so what we have been doing was, going a little bit forward and then coming back, going a little bit forward and coming back. And this is our restructuring, I guess, if you want to call it that, review of the different types of reports. And let me just check the schedule and I'll tell you the order in which we'll be doing them. Because up to this point with reports, we have looked at, um, let's see, we've looked at all the different types, looked at each paragraph at a time to go into details of what is done. And now we're starting with incidents, then we're going to do accidents, competitions, activities, events, and natural disasters. And that will take us down to the end of the term. So that would be over the next 6 weeks, we would be going back to each of the different types, looking at what you should be doing at this point to reinforce and to support what your child or your students have been doing so far. All right, so let's take that look at the incident reports. And then after that, we're going on to the narratives. We are reviewing falling action and resolution. We'll talk a lot more about that. And then today for our, check-in with comprehension, I'm going to be talking about something that's going to help students with their vocabulary with the comprehension, because I don't know if you've noticed, but every single comprehension passage has something about vocabulary in it, whether it's a meaning, a synonym, using the vocabulary to understand, um, what's going on in the passage. There will be something related to vocabulary in that comprehension. So hi, someone is messaging from YouTube. Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for joining me. um that is awesome. I normally get most people check in with the SEA Peacefield. So I'm really excited that you messaged. Thank you so much. All right. So yeah, so stick around to the end if comprehension and that vocabulary question is giving you a little bit of trouble, because I realized this week, and I always ask for questions. If you have any specific question related to any of the comprehension sections or creative writing, let me know, because I really want to make sure that these sessions are as meaningful as possible. So I will be doing that question and answer segment as I go to make sure I cover the questions that you have. I think that works a lot better than me just generally giving you information, hoping that I'm answering the issues that you're dealing with. So this particular issue with the comprehension came up in a class, one of my classes this week, and I realized that the student didn't understand how to approach these vocabulary questions. And um, it's not unique to him. I've had many students, and when I use certain terms, they're like, Miss, what's that? When I explain it, it's like, yeah, they have a vague idea about it, but then they don't know how to implement it effectively to really help them during the comprehension activities. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that near the end. So stick around if it is that comprehension and specifically that vocabulary issue is a point of concern for you. All right, so let's take a look at incident reports. So right now we are looking at incident reports, and we are considering what we need to focus on at this point um, with your child having an idea of what an incident report is. Although I want to say that it's worth repeating, going over the definition of what an incident report is, because I've had students, when I ask them, okay, what type of writing are you doing at school? And they would say, well, miss, we're working on a bullying report, or we're working on um, um, vandalism, or they give the specific nature of the report that they're working on. And while that is very useful because they're understanding that point, it is very effective to have students group the ideas and have an understanding of like elements of incident reports and elements of the various types, because what's going to happen is that they will meet a prompt that has some information that can be grouped into an incident report. However, if it's not an issue that they're familiar with, they may not even recognize that it's an incident report and therefore something that they can work on. So, to help students really be able to approach their report prompts with confidence, my recommendation is to make sure that students understand what are the elements or characteristics of the various types of reports. Now, I've listed six, which would be incident, accident, competition, event, activity, and natural disaster. If you look at it, I have not encountered a report that could not be a report prompt that couldn't be fit into one of those. So if you encounter any and you can't figure out what type of report it is, send it to me and I'll analyze it and show you what type of report it is and how you could recognize the different types of reports when you look at the prompt. We did do analyzing report prompts a couple episodes back, so that might be an episode that you want to look at to help with that. But the idea is that this week, you're focusing on incident reports. And when I say this week, I mean from today till next Tuesday when we move on to accident reports. And so, what you're doing is making sure your child A understands what an incident report is, and B, they're able to recognize a prompt that is an incident report prompt. And once that happens, then what you're moving on to is looking at the details and the type of information that would go into a variety of incident reports. So this week is going to mean sitting with a sheet of paper and doing some brainstorming, making a list of all the different incidents that students can possibly encounter, and then going through each one with the 5 paragraph structure so that the child or the student knows, okay, what kind of information should go in. So let me just back up a bit and go through the definition and the characteristics. I'm looking for my notes. Definition and characteristics so that you can really get into the details. Now, I am using my notes from the report writing series that I have. Report writing challenge, 5 reports. Now, yeah, it's named 5 reports, but I added in the natural disasters. So there are actually 6, but that's it's a nice title and I like it, so I'm sticking with it, right? 5 reports. So let's look at the incident reports. Now, each type of report has its own booklet in that series. And so there's a definition, some characteristics, plus that paragraph by paragraph breakdown to show you the kinds of details that would go into each paragraph. Then there's a sample report and a few prompts that you can practice with. Right, so let's see. So definition of incident reports. These provide information on situations where someone did something deliberately, and that's the key difference between accidents and incidents, right? In an incident, something was done deliberately. So the perpetrators set out to do this on purpose, and that's what really makes a difference. And then what once they set out to do this thing on purpose, the result of it is damage or harm, and that would be damage to property, harm to an individual or an animal or a living thing. And also it would include loss of property. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. Loss of property is also considered an incident when the perpetrators deliberately set out to do it. So if they deliberately set out to steal something, that is an incident report. If they deliberately set out to deface property, which is damage to property, incident report. Bullying smack dab in the middle of incident reports because one person is deliberately causing harm, whether emotional, psychological, or physical. They're deliberately causing harm to another person. So that is an incident report. So you want to go through, just, do a little refresher, ask the student, what do you remember about incident reports? And if they give you examples only, make sure they know the definition, because an example is wonderful. So they understand the concept, but in order to be able to identify or label a report as an incident report by reading a prompt, the student really needs to know the definition and characteristics of an incident report. So, when they read a prompt, what would make that prompt an incident report is when we're looking at, okay, is there any damage to property or any the threat of the damage as well. So that's something that I wanted to add. Um, so incident reports include threats too. All right, I'm going to just put that up. So it's threat of violence, harm, damage, or um, loss, loss of property. I wonder if all of that's going to fit on the line. We'll see when I put it up. But yeah, it includes threats as well. Ah, yes, it fit. So the actual damage is one thing, but the threat of the damage is another thing and would also be included in an incident, because threats show intention, and that means this person is deliberately, they're planning to do something that is going to lead to harm, damage, or loss of property. So that would also be included under incident reports. So make sure the student has that information absolutely clear. So when you ask them, what's an incident report? They should be able to rattle it off to you saying, well, mommy, sir, daddy, miss, um, an incident report is a report on a situation where there's damage, harm, loss of property, or at least a threat of damage, harm, and loss of property. You want them to be able to say it in similar words so that they can identify it. And why is that important? Because when they read the prompt in the exam is not going to be identical to what they've been working with. Remember, the prompts that they're working with are for practice and to get an idea of how to write these types of reports. So it is unlikely that they will see a prompt in the exam that's word for word what they've been working with. So you want them to be able to have that general concept so that they can, look at the new prompt and analyze it effectively and identify the areas that, okay, this is loss of property, so that's an incident. This is bodily harm to an individual, that's incident. They damage this thing, so then that has to be incident. You want them to be able to identify that. So this is what you're double checking and reminding this week what that definition is. And then you're going through a few prompts, randomly select a few prompts, mix them up, don't have only incident reports, but ask the student to identify, pull out the incident reports. They don't have to identify the others. We're going to be going through that over the course of the next 6 weeks. But for the incident reports this week, you want them to be able to, let's say you give them a list of 10 prompts, they need to be able to go through and accurately identify which of those 10 prompts are incident prompts. And then you want to question them further. What makes it an incident prompt? Is it a loss of property, a loss of, bodily harm, loss of property, bodily harm, or damage to property? What makes it an incident report? And then from there you want to go through like listing different kinds of incident reports. So that is also something that you want to do. So this week we're doing three things. One, working on making sure the student understands what an incident report is and be able to recite that definition for you with examples. Two, we're going through a list, and you can do this periodically. I would say do it at least 3 times, a list of 10 prompts, and have the child identify which of these are incident reports, and they have to give you reasons for their answers. Always double check with asking, what's the reason you're giving me this answer, to make sure that they're not just guessing, because some students can guess really well, and sometimes they might know the reason but not be able to explain it. And you want them to be able to articulate themselves, so you want them to be able to explain their reasoning. Now, that kind of strategy, having students explain their reasoning, is useful for everything. It's useful to help you understand their processing and how they're thinking to come up with their answers. It's useful for comprehension because lots of the comprehension questions ask for, give a reason for your answer. And students really need to be able to explain their reasons effectively. So definitely ask them. You say this is an incident report. Why did you say that? What's your reasoning? Justify it for me. And so you go through the prompts like that. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is that you really want to brainstorm the as many different types of incidents as you can think of, and sort of walk through the type of details that could be given. And this is where we get into making sure they're able to fill out the information in the rest of the 5 paragraphs, because they may be able to recognize this an incident report. They may be able to tell you why they recognized it, but then if they have to write it, they may not know what would go into each section. So I'll give you an example. So let's say there is something was stolen, and the child was in the vicinity and observed when the thing was stolen and who stole it. The child could write, okay, I saw the person steal it, and then I went and I told the teacher, and the teacher came and took the child away. And that's like what, 3 sentences, 2 sentences? Of course, that's not enough for a full report because we want details. And how do you develop those details? And that is what you really want to explore this week. So we're really clear on the what an incident is. We have a great idea on how to identify a prompt as an incident report. And now we're moving on to making sure that we know how what kind of details to put into which section. So here's what you're going to do. This is my recommendation. We've recognized that the incident report is threat of violence, harm, and when I say harm, I mean bodily harm to an individual. Damage would be damage to property, and then we have loss of property. So we have four categories, four different kinds of incident reports that we can focus on. So then you want to set aside some time and do some brainstorming. So maybe 10 minutes to list as many situations as that you could think of that include a threat of violence or a threat of any kind. Then 10 minutes to think of situations where you have an incident that creates that would result in like bodily harm to someone. Then another 10 minutes for damage to property, and then another 10 minutes loss of property. And you really just want to list, so you're writing as many as you can think of. And then you can do this verbally, and the ones that the student might feel a little stuck on, then you go through and you write out those, because the writing really helps in terms of the understanding. So you go through and you write out those. So let's say you ended up with about 6 different situations. See if you could stretch to 10. You really want to stretch to 10 because that would give you the best spread possible. And then you go through. So if you say, okay, damage to property, let's say the students vandalized the back of the school, they spray painted it, they vandalized one of the teacher's cars, maybe they vandalized the classroom. Um, Students could be bullying another one, and what they did was to take the student's bag and rip it, or, rip their book, or whatever the situation is. You list it, list as many as you can think of. And you want to do this along with the student. So you listing while they're listing, and then you compare, check off the ones that you have in common, the ones that you don't have in common, then you discuss them and you go through the details. And the ones that you do have in common, go through the details and see, okay, do you know how to begin? What goes into paragraph 2 for reports like this one? You know the main incident, but then what happens immediately after? How do you end a report like this with this particular kind of incident? And so that's what you're going through, and you're brainstorming and you're making that list. So we're starting with the definition so we can have the different categories. And so far we've identified 4 different kinds of incident reports. And then we're brainstorming and we're making sure we have that information. So you can think of this like the pre-writing. Remember, the writing process has a few stages. We're into pre-writing again. So we did some writing, and then we're coming back to pre-writing to really clarify ideas. And during this process, we're doing some research. And so if the student really doesn't recognize, okay, I know with theft, people could get caught, but like, how do you break down the stealing itself? What do you talk about before the stealing happens? These things, have them research. Look for videos on YouTube that talk about these things. Look through different Facebook groups that deal with primary school students and so on, and see what is said so that you could advise and share information. Because at this point, information is super, super, super important, because you want the child to go into the exam feeling confident that they have knowledge and they can share whatever comes. They will be prepared because they've done the research. And then guess what? You get a bonus by doing all of these things. Do you know that being able to critically analyze and research information is one of the, I guess we can call them soft skills, that make a huge difference in a person's life, whether at university or at work, in the job market, even if you're going into business for yourself? What is the number one thing that new business owners and entrepreneurs are told? Research your market, understand your audience, know who they are. And how do you do that? You have to do some investigations. So when people ask me, I know this is kind of an aside, but when people ask me, why do students need to do creative writing? Why do they have to do reports? This is why we're learning critically important skills without actually labeling them in this particular way, but students are learning how to do these things. So, but it's important that you do it the right way. We're not just giving students a prompt to write on. If that's all you're doing, then the students aren't learning the skills that they can learn that would help them in the future. You really need to go through all of these types of processes. So that's just an aside to help you understand why learning reports is important. I mean, I am one of those people who thinks that you know I'm trying to choose my words wisely. It's too late to back out of saying this now because I already kind of started it, but I disagree with the way reports are taught in general, and I disagree with the way it's tested. But what I don't disagree with, what I actually agree with, is that it should be taught and it should be tested. So that's, I think that's the best way I could say it without getting into details and possibly getting myself into trouble. Um, but yeah, so while I disagree with how it's generally taught and how it's tested, I do believe it's absolutely important for the starting the foundation of life skills that would be repeated in secondary school and university and at work. But it has to be done systematically and effectively. And I'm hoping that what I'm sharing with you is helping you see that and giving you some of the steps that you could work on. Right. So I think that is it pretty much what I wanted to share with you for incident reports. So this week, just a recap, what you're doing is you are making sure the definition is clear, making sure the student has a really good understanding and they can repeat it back to you. You are brainstorming on the different types of incident reports, and you're doing some research to double check and make sure you have the information that could go into each section for that kind of report. All right, so I think that's it for the incident reports. Unless you have any questions, just type it in the chat. You could message me on Facebook as well. If I or WhatsApp, let me just put in my number. And please WhatsApp because I am quite often either in meetings or in classes, so I can't take calls all the time. However, I will respond with two WhatsApp messages. If not me directly, I'll get my assistant to respond so that you can get the information that you need. All right. So let me just put that up on screen for those of you who don't already have my contact. um 717-4993, and just send me a WhatsApp message. And if you don't already have your copy of the report writing series, WhatsApp me and I'll send you the information. um yeah, go ahead, ask your question, just type it in the chat and I'll be able to, it'll come up on my screen, your question, and I'll be able to see it and respond to it. All right, so let's just give someone has a question. Let me just give them a moment. Um, and while that is happening, so yeah, go ahead and type it out the same way you've been messaging me, and I'll see it. Right. So while that is happening, let me. Where is my copy? Um. Yeah, I should really have this to hand, so that I could show you quickly that copy of the of my report writing series. Um. Oh, that's a good question. I dread that question because it's one of those yes or no things. Okay, is a natural disaster report an incident? Um, it's a natural disaster report is a kind of mix of different types of reports, which is why originally I used to put it under incidents. However, after doing more investigation of what it is and what happens during a natural disaster, I have since separated it to a category by itself. So natural disasters are unique and they do require different kinds of vocabulary and so on. So that's why I have it separately. So in the list of the different types of reports that that package, the report writing package has, you have incidents, accidents, competitions, events, activities, and natural disasters. It's a separate concern because there is possible damage to property, there is damage um, to the humans can be hurt. So there is damage, but then it's not. Well, I guess we wouldn't put it under intentional because what is causing the damage? It's either a storm, hurricane, earthquake, landslide, not alive. Therefore, if we say it's done intentionally, we're personifying the entity or the element. It's a force of nature. So depending on your philosophy, you may consider it, um, you know, an incident. There is definitely harm and so on. So you can see that part of it, but then there are responses, there are other elements of it, so I put it in a category by itself for ease of instruction. So okay, so yes, that's awesome, and that means so incident reports, that's the booklet number 1, and that carries, you'd have an example, you'd have the breakdown. So go back to that, there's a definition. What's missing in this version, I think the one that you have, would be the idea of threat. So add that in. When I revise the booklets again, I'm going to add that in, the idea that threat of violence and threat of harm works with the incident as well. Okay. All right. Awesome. So you have the tools. So then, yeah. So go back to the booklets as we continue and we work on them, and that would really give you a good foundation. If you have any questions, and let me just say this for the narrative booklets. I was doing a lot of stuff when I was doing that one. So if you notice a few little typos here and there, please forgive them. I am revising those booklets to remove those things. The content and the information is still good, but as a writing teacher, when I go back and I see errors in my writing, I get a little meltdown, and so I have to calm myself. So I'm just putting that out there. It's not perfect in terms of the grammar and the spelling. So just ignore the grammar and the spelling, but the rest of it is still good, right? Because it really does have a lot of information. For the narratives, so let's move on to the narratives, right? For narratives today, what we're paying attention to this week is that falling action and um the resolution. So we've spoken about this before, but of course, like I said, we're going forward, coming back, going forward, coming back, because we want that repetition and reinforcement. And so when we're looking at these the resolution and falling action, it's important that students recognize a couple of things. So the first thing is that what students should recognize is that the falling action is actually a reaction to the climax. And that's something that I teach. It's part of the 12-point plot development that I work with. And those of you who have that, the digital series, 7 stories, that would be booklet 1 in the introduction. There's a breakdown of what goes into each of the points in the 12 points. And point number 11 is falling action. But you'd notice that I don't call it falling action. I call it reaction to climax because that is what it is. And it's important that students recognize that because is going to keep them with that cause and effect kind of cycle going on, which is important for the narratives. And so the falling action is how the characters feel after the climax, what they do in response, so after the climax, and what they say to themselves and each other after the climax. So, what should feed and inform what goes into falling action is the climax. So, your climax has to be a strong climax in order for you to have a good falling action and resolution for that matter. So, everything in a narrative is connected. Well, the climax is how you win. Yes, that is the climax. And it's not just, you do this and win. Climax is a process. And that's also something that I really try to get my students to understand, because the climax is not just one action. The climax is a process. And for those of you who have the 12-point plot, you know the diagram and so on. One of the things is that I color coded the points. And so conflict is red, reaction to conflict is yellow. And if you pay attention to the plot development, you'd see that the climax is orange. And there's a reason it's orange. It's orange because it is a sort of interactive back and forth process between conflict and reaction, because the climax should not be too easy. If your climax is too easy, then your story is not going to feel exciting. And if your climax happens too quickly, the story is not going to feel exciting and readers are not going to be fulfilled. And if those two things are true, then your resolution is going to be really difficult. The resolution includes something called a lesson learned. And a character is going to have a hard time learning a lesson if things come too easy. Lessons are generally learned when there are struggles or challenges that characters have to overcome. So the challenge has to be strong enough for the character to have to go through some stuff emotionally in addition to physically in order to accomplish their goal. And in going through those things, that is when you have those lessons being taught, so that you're not going to learn that, friendship is important if the friendship isn't tested. You're not going to learn that your parents are going to be always there for you if something doesn't happen and you feel hopeless and then you realize that they're there and they help you. You're not going to learn that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover unless you did that and some stuff happened and you had to get out of it by doing things. You're not going to learn that lesson. So it's important then that your climax has to be strong, conflict has to be challenging in order for that um, reaction to climax to be meaningful, as well as for the resolution to be meaningful. So the lesson learned. So for this week, in terms of going through this understanding of the falling action and the resolution, which would be the reaction to climax, what you're looking at is two things. One, making sure students recognize that reaction includes feelings, behavior, and speech. Also, recognizing that the resolution must include that lesson learned, and the lesson learned is based on what took place in the story. Now, I know that many students have some challenges with understanding what that lesson learned is and how to write it and how to include it in the story. So another thing that I'm going to recommend that you work on this week is making a list of lessons. So sit down and brainstorm. So, okay, think about what could happen in a story and what could a character learn from something like this. So just as you did or you're going to do with the reports where you have a list of prompts and you're reviewing and discussing them, work with a list of narrative prompts and discuss the story. So no writing involved here just yet. Discuss the story. What are some challenges that the students could face, their character would go through? What lesson can they learn from these things? And list them. So list as many as you can and discuss how those lessons can be taught in different ways so that your child or your students would really understand how to connect that lesson learned with the rest of the story. So you're making that list that they could refer to. And if you want to come down to like maybe five or six that they use over and over in different scenarios, that is perfectly fine. Remember, while um, it would be awesome if a student could come up with a new lesson learned for each story that they write. Remember, we're preparing for an exam, right? We're not really testing, you know, um, the students' ability to write a story only. We're testing their specific writing skills, grammar, spelling, punctuation, plot structure, transitions, vocabulary, figurative language, use of vivid descriptions. We're testing a few things, so having a lesson learned is important, and that's what you're being tested on. Having that lesson learned and the fact that it's connected to the rest of the story, that's where you make the marks. What the lesson learned is, as long as it's connected to the story, that's fine. So if you work with the same three or the same five over and over in every single story, that's okay. This is an exam. So you're practicing, but of course, you don't want to just use one. That is going to limit you because that is going to really make it difficult if you get with the different variety of prompts. Is going to be a challenging thing if you only work with one lesson learned. So I recommend, let's say, 3 to 5 that you could rotate. And then what that's going to do is to allow that student to really and thoroughly understand how conflict relates to those lessons and how rising action relates to those lessons, how falling action relates to those lessons, how the climax. So you'd really be able to explore some stuff if you work with, like 3 to 5. And then the student is going to be able to, at the beginning, identify, I'm going to use this lesson because I feel this lesson will work good with this story. And then they are in control of their writing and not the writing controlling them, and they're not understanding what to do and so on. So you really do want to pay attention to making a list of lessons and figuring out which ones work the best with the student, which ones they like, which ones they're interested in writing about, narrow it down to 3 to 5, and then you practice including those. And then when you're doing your plotting and you're annotating the prompts, remember we're going from full plotting to annotating prompts. When they're annotating the prompts as part of their pre-writing planning, just write down the lesson that you're going to be working with. And that's going to help keep you focused and keep you on track. Right? So I think that is like the main conversation I wanted to have with you where the lesson learned and the resolutions are concerned. So, just to recap, to make sure that you're clear on what it is you're working on this week with the lessons learned and the resolution. One, you're making sure students recognize that the falling action is a reaction to climax, and that reaction to climax must have a few parts to it: emotional reaction, behavior in reaction, and speech. It's a good place to have some dialogue. Or even if the character is thinking out loud to themselves, that's perfectly fine there too. But you really want to work with those three aspects. So, one, falling action is reaction to climax, and two, it is a three-part thing that you have to develop and explore effectively in relation to the climax. And then your resolution, also in relation to climax, must have a lesson learned. And that lesson learned should include um, what the characters learned from the experiences that they've been through. So that's the kind of thing that you're working with there. All right. So for this week, now you have a sort of guide on what you could work on with reports and what you can work on with narratives. If there are no questions on that, and even if I move on and you ask your question, I'll come back to it. Um, what I want to touch on quickly before I close off is to mention that thing that I spoke to you about at the beginning where comprehension is concerned. And we will end with that, right? Um, so, all right, so I'm going to type it, make sure I spell things properly. All right, so I don't know if you've ever heard of something called context clues. This is the thing that really helps students with those vocabulary questions. And it was, I made an assumption that context clues are always taught and that students are reminded of and shown how to use context clues. But it, I noticed it in a couple students this week that they don't remember, and I am quite certain any book on comprehension will include context clues because it's an extremely important part of understanding what you read. However, the practice and the reinforcement and the reminder that these are strategies that they must use, some students they need that and they don't often get it as often as they would need. So a context clue is pretty much what it says. We're looking at the word in context, and you're getting a clue within the passage, within the poem, within the text that helps you figure out what that word means in that context. And that's why it's called a context clue. Now, the good news and then not so good news is that there are more than one strategies for context clues. It's not that a context clue equals this. Context clues could be synonyms, they could be antonyms, they could be explanations. Um, you know what? I'll show you one that I encountered this week. And when I spoke with the student, it was, I showed him how to recognize it. So this is one of the practice test booklets. Um, I think it's a Subnic practice test, but I just really want to show you. Let's see, I think I could share my screen and you would see what I've been on about. All right. So we're at the top of the screen. So this is the whole thing. Maybe if I make it a little bigger, it might help. Um, this is what, 81. Let's put it at 100. All right. So we're at the top of the screen. And this particular question asked, what is a fissure, right? So the question, what is a fissure, or you had to like define fissure. Um, and so we're looking at this passage to get the answer. Now, if you read this sentence, so the word fishers is in quotation marks here, which means that it's a special word. Now, when we read this sentence, it shows one example of a type of context clue. So you have, I'll read it out loud. So it forces its way up fissures, which are narrow cracks in the Earth's crust. Now, that sentence actually includes the definition or an explanation of what a fissure is. But a student would not recognize that unless they are aware that something like that can happen, that you can actually get the definition of a word in the passage itself. Sometimes it comes under definition, sometimes it comes under explanations, but it really is giving you the answer. And so the student doesn't have to come up with their own meaning. They can look in the passage and find it if they understand what a context clue is and how to recognize different types of context clues. Some people list about 6 different types, some people list up to 9 different types of context clues, but really understanding that context clues exist and you can use them to decipher vocabulary, that is going to help the student in more ways than one. Yes, there's always going to be that vocabulary question, but then it's going to help them understand what the passage is telling them, just for the sake of understanding the information to be able to answer other types of questions as well. So context clues are hugely important for those vocabulary questions as well as for the general comprehension, for students to really understand what they're reading. So this type of context clue is called an explanation or definition, and these types are set apart by, once you see a word in quotation marks, it means that it's a special word. And somewhere around here, because the writers recognize it's a special word, they are going to give you information on it. So that's one. And two, you also recognize it by the words which are. Sometimes you would see which is. That is going to give you an idea that a definition or explanation is coming after. So this is one type of context clue, the explanation context clue or the definition context clue. There are others, as I said, some people list 9, some people list 6, and a student being able to recognize that, hey, a context clue is being used means that they know the different types and they know what they look like and how to recognize them. This is one way you can recognize the definition or explanation by the which is or which are. And when you see words in quotation, it means that that's a special word or phrase, and the writer is going to give you some kind of explanation or something coming from that. Right? So that's what I really wanted to share when it comes to the comprehension, and it has to do with really recognizing that there are tools and there are strategies to help students with comprehension when it comes to vocabulary. And it's not just that they have to read it over and over and simply know the word. Even when they know the word, use context clues to decipher the meaning in that context. Because we know we have a very lovely English language that has one word with 7, 8 different meanings depending on the context that you use it in. So you really kind of have to be careful with that. So don't just because you know the word, write a definition. When you see questions like this, the question usually says something like, give a meaning for these words as they are used in the passage. So your definition is not just going to be what a dictionary definition of the word could be. And sometimes when you look in dictionaries, you would see a word has, 1, 2, 3, they number it, because there sometimes are different definitions depending on the context about how the word is used. So it's not enough to know the vocabulary or know the word. Students have to be able to put the word in context and give definitions for how the word is used in the passage. And therefore, context clues really support that kind of thing. And you can go online. I mean, there are tons and tons of information online, details online. You can get worksheets, you can get passages with practice, all kinds of different things if you know what you're looking for. So look for context clues, right? Um, I'm going to put that back up. So context clues. So that's what you're doing a search for, context clues, and you can get quite a lot of information. The best ones to use are the ones that are from English as a second language sites, because their language is going to be more simple and their examples are going to be fairly simple as well, to make sure students really understand the concepts. Um, and that's something that I think really look into that. It is going to help tremendously with those vocabulary type questions. Plus, it's going to have the added benefit of a student being able to understand comprehension in general, decipher what they're meaning so that they can understand other types of questions too. All right, so context clues, look it up. I am working on a worksheet with context clues, but as you can imagine, it's on a list of things that I have to work on. I'm aiming for it at least by end December so that by January you can have some work with it, practice, and so on. But we would see, I have a long list of things that I want to work on because I recognize that having these worksheets and so on would be really quite useful for you, based on the feedback I've been getting from parents and the work that I've been doing. I'm also recognizing that while um, narrative writing and creative writing is my specialty, I do have an affinity for teaching comprehension. And the reason is this: comprehension is one side of writing, being the author is the other side. If you truly want to develop comprehension, you also have to understand writing. And so once you do, you'd be able to deal with both. So that a student who understands how reports are broken down and the different sections of a reports and the different ways that nonfiction writing is created will have a much easier time responding to a nonfiction passage. A student who understands plot and plot development is going to have a much easier time answering questions on fiction passages. And so, with that in mind, what this term, this December, I'm going to be offering a few courses. And if you can bear with me, let me just show you what it is. Registration is going to open Sunday. I'm still putting the forms together, but let me just share with you what it is I'm working on so that you'd know what you can yeah, that's kind of teeny. Let me see. I think I could make it bigger, can't I? All right, here we go. A lot better. So, mastering comprehension, that's what I'm calling the course. I'm going to have two groups because we're only going to be spending 5 days on it. And contrary to popular belief, you don't need instruction on comprehension, you know, incessantly. What you need is to understand the strategies and then you practice them and get feedback. So that's really where you want to get to. So what I'll be doing in this program is to introduce the different um, skills and strategies that would work for each of the different types of comprehension. And the number one thing that students need to know, and I'll tell you right up right now, is that there are different types of comprehension passages, and therefore they would need slightly different strategies when approaching them. So there isn't a one size fits all when it comes to comprehension. We have fiction passages, we have nonfiction, we have poetry, and we have graphics. So there are four of them. And students need to know that, you'd be getting different questions because with a fiction passage, for example, you might get a question on the characters. You wouldn't get that in nonfiction because nonfiction doesn't have characters per se, right? With poetry, you would get a lot more questions on figurative language than you would get in a nonfiction because nonfiction doesn't have that. So it's not like, okay, you learn these comprehension strategies and then you just apply it across the board. it doesn't work like that for many students. They really do need specific instruction in the different kinds. So in that program, we're going 5 days. First, we'd be looking at the different types. Then we'd be going through each one: nonfiction, fiction, poetry, and graphics. And I'll be giving skills for each one. Then I'd be doing a report writing series, 4 days for those, because this is an intensive for standard 5 students. So they should already have some idea of reports and report writing. These programs are for students. So these top programs, so the Mastering Comprehension students, Mastering Report Writing, Mastering Narrative Writing students. Teacher training program would be open for teachers and parents, but these three are really for students, and I'd be giving students the instruction. So for the report writing, we'd be looking at the problem areas, which I've seen to be transition words, um, the okay, I have my list here. I'll tell you in a little bit. I was just kind of really putting it together. Analyzing prompts and planning, mastering the introduction. I'm still seeing that, there are students who are having challenges getting started. So there's a formula that I give. If you have the booklets, the report booklets, I do give the formula, but of course this program would be more for like a drill kind of practice. um so if you want, you can, and you'd get the feedback. Transition phrases and passive voice, reported speech, and effective conclusion. So those are the things that we'd be covering for the report writing. And I've adjusted the way that I offer this program. In the past, I would do, like a challenge with, I actually created the 5 reports challenge for the December programs, but I realized, and based on feedback I got from parents, it was a bit heavy for the students to really kind of internalize all of that information. So I've lightened it a little bit so that I can zero in on specific issues, and I've included a 30-minute one-on-one session. So while we're doing 4 days instead of 5, that fifth day is going to be broken up into me being available to each student registered for the class to have a 30-minute session where I work with them on their specific writing. And that is going to give them the most impact, I think, from the program. So they will have notes, and I'll be giving notes and, documents to they can follow up with afterward. But that one-on-one session, so it's 30 minutes, and you'd be surprised at how significant that 30 minutes can be. I'm doing the same thing with the narratives. For the narratives, we're definitely working on plot, descriptive language, and integrating the descriptive language. Climax still tends to be an issue for many, many students, especially that bridge between the problem and the climax, which is the intervention. We will be working on that. And ending stories seems to be a challenge still. So those are the 4 main areas that we'll be working on with the narratives. And of course, there's going to be that same 30-minute session, one-on-one session for students. And what I'll be doing this time around as well, in addition to keeping the classes small, no more than 10 students, um, I am going to be giving a report at the beginning and one at the end. So we will be writing reports during the time, but there'd be an entry assessment and an exit assessment. And so the entry assessment and what the students write during the class, that's what I'll be working on with the student one-on-one. And then they would get an exit assessment that they would do on their own and submit. And then at the end of the whole thing, parents are going to get detailed feedback. You'll get a feedback packet, and that feedback packet would include the entry assessment, one report written during the program, and the exit assessments. You'll be getting details on those three so that you can actually see if there was improvement during the time and what areas still need to be worked on. So those are the three programs for students. And I'm also going to do the teacher training for those teachers and parents who want to get that little bit extra, how to actually support their child, how to work with students. And this time around, I normally did this like, report writing was one day, like 4 hour block, and narrative writing was another day, one day, 4 hour block. But the same thing was happening with the students. It's a lot of information to take in. So this time around, I'm spreading it out over 4 days, and each day would be 2 hours. So we're getting 8 hours altogether. One of them definitely is going to be on feedback, because feedback is like the critical point for instructor student interaction, parent child interaction. Feedback is absolutely important because that's where students really develop their writing. They could know all the skills, but if they're not implementing it properly, you as the tutor have to be able to identify the issue and show them how to change it so that they can have that point of development. So that's definitely going to be one of the days. We would look at specific systems, and these costs are a little bit more than the student programs, as you can imagine. The reason they are like this is because they include materials. And so for the report writing program, I'm going to be giving not the booklets, but like the foundation programs. I have these, there are 3 books in all, right? There's a journal, a practice booklet, and the textbook that is going to be included in that report writing program. The narrative writing program, I don't have the materials with me right now, but that one includes the flashcards and plot poster, because the plot and understanding plot is like the core of narratives. Everything else is hinged on plot. Descriptions are hinged on plot. Um, Hooks, part of plot. Climax, plot, part of plot. So the real key to teaching narrative writing effectively is having a system for teaching plot that integrates the other skills so that students can have that understanding of what's going on. And so that's why the cost is like that, because you are going to be getting copies. I'm going to be mailing out to you. So when you register, you leave an address, and I'll be sending it out. So you will have the materials to be able to follow along and work with. So I'm not just giving you information that you have to now go and find stuff. I will actually be sharing a lot of what I do personally in my classes, including some of the worksheets, like the digital worksheets. I'll be sharing that with you as well. And once you do the program, you're going to have the I guess the permission to use them in your with your child. If you want to use it with a class, um, then we can chat about that, because with the class, I'd prefer that, students have their own copies rather than, the photocopying and so on. But you will have permission to use it once you do one of these programs. So you'll be getting the materials, permission to use it, plus instruction of how to use it and to make it relevant to the group that you're working with. And you would have me, sorry, you'd have me to ask questions, help guide you, and support you as you go with the training and the teaching of the reports and narratives. I don't have a program yet for comprehension and teaching comprehension, but I am working on it. Yes, that's also on the list, because I'm seeing where there are some gaps that I have the ability and the skills, and I'm creating the materials. So when I have the materials ready for that comprehension program, that's when I'm going to offer it. Because in the past, once I did a teacher training workshop, but I didn't have materials. And that was the one thing that teachers were asking for. How can I use this in my classrooms? What materials do you have? What worksheets? What textbooks? How can I implement it? So I decided to stop telling people what to do and start showing them with materials. And that's where those courses came from, using materials that I use in my classes. All right, so I think I have been talking for a while, a little bit longer than I think I intended. Um, but I'm hoping that the information is useful. And remember, WhatsApp me if you have any questions. You can message me on Facebook as well. Tag me in a post in SEA the Peace-Filled Approach. Let me know what materials you need, what kind of support you need so that I can provide it as best as possible. And so I really want to move away from me telling you what to do. I really want to show you based on what you need so that at the end of it, you are empowered and you have the materials to work with. So yeah, so that's my agenda, that's my mission. And I really, really want to thank those of you who stuck it out for a little over an hour. It was just like about 10 minutes over the hour, and I started a little late today. So I appreciate you sticking around and interacting, asking questions, sharing concerns. And please keep doing that. Don't ever stop. I'm here to support you on your journey toward SEA 2024 and beyond. For those of you who are standard for parents and teachers, all this information works just as well. All right. So thank you again. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of today. And I look forward to seeing you next week, Tuesday, when we go to accident reports and other concerns with the narratives and comprehension. Okay. So take care. Have a good one. See you next week.